Hello, my name is David Barker, and I'm here with Dr. Shana, and this is Ask Shana. Webinar today's date is April 10th. We are going to be talking about managing finances and in terms of grieving. And I think there's probably quite a bit that might be happening right now about that. Doctor, go ahead.
By the way, this is called Ask Dr. Shana. Anyway, well, I was just thinking that there are probably quite a number of people out there who are grieving the loss of a family member very recently, while at the same time having to manage their finances when they either have lost their job or they're not allowed to work. There are some people who haven't been fired. They'll go right back when things open up again, but they can't work right now, which means they can't get a paycheck right now. And that can be very difficult. I would say if you have the death of someone close to you, even if it wasn't someone you got along very well with, and you have these financial problems at the same time, this is Friday afternoon. You could take a couple of days, Saturday and Sunday, and spend them remembering the person who was lost and grieving their loss, because what I'm trying to avoid for you is making financial decisions when you're actually in the middle of grief, because people don't necessarily choose wisely and rationally when they're very upset with grief at the same time. Now, if you have financial woes, you sort of have to tell yourself that you'll do whatever seems to you reasonable for grieving this weekend. But I would say as of maybe 8 p.m. on Sunday evening, you start to come back to being a financial decision maker, and you put whatever more grieving you would be inclined to away for a few days while you cope with your financial problems. In other words, don't try and be feeling grief and straightening out your finances at one and the same time. It doesn't work. Either you do foolish things with your money, or you do sensible things with your money, but your grieving process is not handled well, and that can cause you difficulty with feelings and with expressing yourself for years to come. And we don't want.
It's really you need to do kind of one focus on one thing at a time, and
Yes.
even when grief happens, it's unexpected, but perhaps there's some planning that could be done in advance.
Well, the thing is, when people, before the person dies, you may be very much into this is logical, this is reasonable. She was 89 years old and she had heart disease. This is a friend of mine, and she got into bed to have an afternoon nap and never woke up, which is about the easiest kind of death you can have because the person does not watch themselves get thinner and thinner and sicker and sicker. They don't have a tremendous amount of pain. Um, and they are unlike a person who dies in a head on collision in that they don't have extreme anxiety for a few seconds before the collision hits. So they really have the easiest time there could be. But um, this was my friend's mother. Anytime anybody's mother dies, because of all the um, imagery we have about mother, and because mother was somebody who took care of a person from babyhood, it's always a shock. And now, if you are one of the few who actually if the person who died is one of the few who actually made out a will and stated their preferences as to um, resuscitation in terms of do they want to be put on a ventilator? Do they want this type of care? Do they want that? That makes it a lot easier for the uh, people who are left behind because they don't have any decisions to make. And um, I would say everybody over 30 should have their will made out and their choices for end of life care and so on because it makes it so much easier on the bereaved family. They then only have to deal with the fact that the person has died and they're not saying, well, would she really want to be on a ventilator or not? Or would she really want to be given enough painkiller that she doesn't feel anything, but on the other hand, she can't communicate very well because high dose of painkillers befuddles the mind? Or would she sooner have some pain, not excruciating pain, but some pain, and be able to say, you know, um, my dear daughter, I've always loved you, or something like that.
Those
Um,
final words, yes.
so, and how to choose all these things. And I think it's regrettable, but there are a fairly large proportion of um, healthcare workers, nurses, and doctors who push to treat everything and to um, they're always thinking of the medical outcome and they're not thinking of this person is very probably dying and maybe we should think of their comfort, their famous last words, uh, their uh, um, I would only say comfort again on exiting this world. In other words, the hospice notion. Acute medicine says we will do everything in our power to keep this person alive longer. Hospice says we recognize that it is a human occurrence to die, and we want to make the passage to the next world as comfortable and as so that the person leaves this world feeling loved, for example, and so that uh, if they, shall we say, they have a son that they haven't gotten along with for a long time, uh, if it were possible, have mother and son have a little conversation in which he says, I know I was very difficult at times, but I always loved you, Mom. Um,
It's sort of it's a bit about focusing on the quality of one's life and making those
yes,
decisions rather than the quantity, which sometimes medical science and is geared towards just prolonging life at all cost. And I
yes,
think there's a move. Obviously, the hospice movement has been a tremendous benefit for many families and many individuals. So that's great that you brought that up. Um,
yes. So, but the emotions of grief and being left alone, and it really has nothing to do with, well, your mother was 89 and she had heart disease. Of course she's going to die. Um,
mhm.
because your mother is your mother. She was probably the first human face you saw when you were born. And it's the symbolism of my mother takes care of me. My mother loves me. My mother's there when I'm in trouble. And then all of a sudden, when she's dead, you are in a way by yourself for the first time in your life. You can't uh, make a long distance call and talk to mom. Um, and all these emotions, you may have some tremendous affection, and you also may have some resentment for some things she did. And all that emotional stuff uh, interferes with, shall we say, making a schedule about how you get back on track with paying rent to your landlord now that you and your husband are not working and not receiving paychecks, and you have applied for unemployment, but because 17 million people applied for unemployment in the last 3 days, well, it isn't, it isn't forthcoming yet. Now, I'm going to switch to how to manage your finances. Uh, you're much better if your landlord is a human person. You can say, well, I'm a little scrambled today because my mother died last night. But the landlord wants to hear, because the landlord has the question of paying the mortgage for owning the building and paying the janitorial staff and paying to have the trash removed. Um, and he certainly doesn't want to be the kind of landlord who doesn't pay to have the trash removed, so the trash just builds up and the place becomes um, a health hazard. So, but the thing is, I cannot pay you today, but I applied for unemployment and put in the proper day or date, and they said that I should get a check for unemployment within a month. So, and the first uh, person that I will be paying is you. And this is where it is helpful to be able to say to your landlord, I have been in this apartment for X years and I have never been late with the rent before. We are in the middle of a national crisis of large proportions, and you will get your rent, but it might be as much as a month late. And say, if I get the check sooner, you'll get your check sooner. Um, Unfortunately, there are legal protections passed last week by Congress for mortgage owners that they can't, uh, and any foreclosures that existed that were in process before this coronavirus pandemic hit
Mm.
uh, have been put on hold, and they cannot uh, kick somebody out on the street. Unfortunately, renters were not given nearly those protections.
I,
Um, so it's not a matter of it is now illegal to kick somebody out for not paying rent, as it is illegal to foreclose a house on somebody who doesn't pay the mortgage on
there,
time.
there may be some comfort for people to know who do rent, who are renters, and for if they've lost their job, and many have, um, there may be some comfort to know that they are not the only ones. And in essence, if because we are in this national emergency and many people have lost their jobs, the things are just going to have to be put on hold just a little bit, and I think things will work through this, and everyone will be able to get to stay in their homes. So take a deep breath, and I think people will be able to get through this, and just knowing that they're not alone.
Uh, I wish you hadn't interrupted because you take away what I was about to say.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Um, and this is a national crisis, and we've all got to hang on as best we can. And your landlord can also be someone who has a mortgage on the building, and he can go to the bank which holds the mortgage and say, you can't foreclose on me. Um, and certainly nobody is alone. Um, and also, if you can approach the landlord as if he is a human being and he can understand, rather than approaching him as a money grubbing somebody who always pressures you to pay up and, you know, say things gently and reassure whoever you owe money to that they will be paid, but a little delay is unavoidable.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, there has been so much suffering and so many people who have died that I don't know of anyone who doesn't know they may not have lost a family member themselves. I couldn't very well because I have a sister who has two children, but that's the extent of my family. So, I mean, I don't have cousins and aunts and uncles and, the whole list of things, so I can't lose them. Um, but the other thing is, don't worry yourself silly. I mean, this is a national emergency, and we will get through it, and so will you, and so will your friends. There may be still some who may die before it's over, but those who don't succumb to coronavirus, or as my friend's 89-year-old mother did, I don't think she didn't have anything to do with coronavirus. She was 89 and she had heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
The old causes of death are still around. Um, but I think it's important to, uh, for instance, say to yourself that after, I don't know, maybe 2.5 months, you're still here and you're still doing okay. And your family does have some food. Um, you have the basics. Uh, now, um, maybe you decide it's a little bit warm, but you're not going to turn on the air conditioner yet to save money on your electric bill. Well, that's no tragedy. That's your decision, and you can reverse the decision when you feel like it. But I think that's a sound decision, because if the weather is 70 degrees outside, you don't really need an air conditioner. You need an air conditioner when it gets to be 95 and with some very high percentage of humidity. So, but hold your fire until then, you know? Um, and if you have a family, maybe you can um, read each other a story or play some music you all like, something that would bring the family together.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want a piece of music that two people say this is great and everybody else says it's just horrible. You don't want dissension. Um, and uh, the little things that you succeed with, for instance, the flowers that you planted a few months ago were beginning to come up. Well, now that suggests that Mother Nature is trying to get on with spring, and that's a good thing. So spend some time thinking about your blessings. Uh, and blessing number one, you're alive. Uh, and um, blessing number two, maybe you have diabetes or heart disease, but you also have some medicine and you feel fairly good. Um, don't always be looking at the terrible things. A friend of mine who herself is 89 said to me, she's arrived at an age when she has an endless series of funerals to go to because her friends who are in their 80s or even their 90s leave this world. And she says, well, it's just part of the territory if a person gets up closer to 90 than to 80. You know, they're going to, well, either they are in the casket themselves or they're going to go to memorial services or something. Um, and of course, it's very complicated because these days, uh, few people are allowed at a funeral and they can't hug each other, which is a real, excuse me, which is a real problem for some people because, you know, a funeral is where the survivors need to feel hugged. I've learned with friends of mine to say, I know I'm not where you are, and even if I were, I couldn't hug you, but feel hugged, feel loved. Um, and uh, just don't give in to panic and a feeling that, you know, this is it, you can't cope with this, and so on. If you're listening to this show, I think you've already coped with coronavirus since, well, it actually started at the end of December. And you're just going through it. And that's what we all have to do. Moment by moment, cope with what you must cope with. But as for owing people money, you say, you know, I have applied for what I'm entitled to. I'm also going to receive $1,200. And when that happens, you'll be the first to know.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the main thing is not to get depressed, not to get the feeling that this is hopeless, we'll never make it. It was, I think, somebody from the CDC who pointed out the other day that something well over 90% of the people who get a coronavirus infection will survive it. When they talk about how many thousands of people who have died and how many people have died in the last 24 hours and so on, that gets obscured. But that's still the fact. We are not dealing with the bubonic plague, which killed each one of its victims, 100% fatal within at most 48 hours. Now, that's a totally different situation. And we don't have that situation. Also, pay attention to social distancing. pay attention to maybe if you have a group of friends, you could go to the grocery store for everybody this week, and somebody else will go next week, and somebody else the following week, so that you're not taking a risk all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, I think that's about what I have to say. Um, if you would like to send an email to Dr. Doctor Shana SHANA I will attempt to answer every communication. I'm sorry that on the first one, the company that was sponsoring the show did not pay for keeping the website active. So the website disappeared and I never was able to get the um, uh, comments that I had. I wish I had, but it was something that I couldn't do anything about.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have control of my website, and Mr. Barker, who introduced me, is going to help me do a posting on Ask Dr. Shana every week indefinitely. There may come a time when we stop, but we don't have that in mind right now. Um, if anybody would like me to address a particular issue, just put a message on my website. At the end of the website, there's a thing that says contact us, and it's about 15 lines for you to explain what you have to say. I would ask you not to um, put more than 15 lines because I may have several, and it's awfully hard to answer everybody if people put in a message of 3 pages.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, but I am very eager to hear from you. Um, so, until next week, I hope you'll all be listening, and I'm open to discussing anything that is in the realm of managing one's life or coping with psychiatric symptoms or a particular problem with your provider, although I can only offer some suggestions as to how to tackle the problem. I'm not going to be saying that you should be taking a different medication or that you should have a different kind of therapy, because that, I think, is your provider's role. I don't know any one of you well, so I'm not going to be making suggestions uh, for changing your medications or your therapy, but I can help anybody who needs help getting a point across to their provider. Um, I had a patient who complained of being nauseated, um, but she didn't happen to mention that she had vomited 3 times in public in the previous week. Now, somebody who says they're somewhat nauseated, well, we might say that you just have to put up with it. But somebody who vomits in public 3 times in 1 week, that's another situation.
Mm-hmm.
So always tell your provider exactly what happened. Because otherwise, he doesn't understand the situation that you face. So, I'll be making another taping next week, and I hope that many of you will be watching. Have a good week in the meantime. And if no tragedy or calamity happens to you, it's just another week of tension, not knowing what the future holds, and but you're okay. Hey, put the emphasis on I'm okay.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you. This has been wonderful. Hope to see all of you next week.